The galaxy remembered the king not as a ruler, but as a shadow cast across every star. He sat upon a throne built on a ruin of civilizations. His banners stretched over worlds that had forgotten their own names. Planets that once sang with languages and culture now spoke only in silence, enforced by his will. His armies were endless, drawn from the broken and enslaved, chained his power not out of loyalty but out of fear. For decades, no resistance lasted more than a season. Those who defied him were erased not only in flesh but in memory, their histories struck from records, so that the galaxy itself would forget they ever lived. The king believed this was a final triumph. Not victory of the sword, but victory over remembrance. Yet there remained one voice that could not be silenced, one general who had refused to bend, whose people still whispered her name. She was human, a rarity in the galactic order, for humanity was not yet recognized as a major power. The galaxy considered them a primitive race on a marginal world, but she had risen from obscurity, fighting with the tenacity of a death world species and the brilliance of a strategist whose vision could turn even weakness into strength. She had beaten the king's armies where none had before. Though she never commanded vast fleets, she wielded her small forces with such precision that entire campaigns collapsed under her hand. Soldiers followed her not for gold or plunder, but for conviction. Even conquered people saw her as a symbol, proof that tyranny was not invincible. The king despised her more than any other. He, who had broken empires, who had slain monarchs and burned dynasties to ash, found in her an enemy who could not be intimidated. Every battle she fought left him humiliated, and though she never claimed conquest, her defiance alone was a challenge to his authority. He could not tolerate her existence, not because she threatened his rule with armies, but because she threatened his rule with hope. For every world that heard her name, every soldier who fought knowing she stood against him, the king's shadow thinned. He could conquer thousands of planets, yet as long as she resisted, the illusion of inevitability cracked. The galaxy whispered that she was different, that she was human, and that humans were not like others. He would prove them wrong. He would crush her, not with distance or with soldiers sent on his behalf, but with his own hand. For the first time in decades, the king left his throne and led his armies personally. To destroy her required nothing less than his presence, for she had turned his lieutenants into fools and his generals into corpses. His advisors warned him that descending into the field was beneath him, but he silenced them with the promise that when he returned, the galaxy would watch him drag her lifeless body in chains. The last stand came on a world already scarred by conquest. It was no one's home, merely the final fortress where her surviving forces gathered. The king's fleet blotted out the sky, and the ground quaked beneath the landing of his soldiers. He offered her terms of surrender, broadcast across all channels, promising her life as she bowed before him. She answered with silence, then with fire as her forces struck first. It was a hopeless defense, and she knew it. She did not fight to win. She fought to show the galaxy that there are causes worth dying for. The battle lasted 3 days. Her soldiers fell one by one, their courage unbroken even as their bodies failed. They fought until their weapons broke, then with blades, then with their hands. Her strategy delayed the inevitable, costing the king dearly in blood and time. He sent wave after wave, and each time she adapted, countering with maneuvers no algorithm could predict. But numbers crushed ingenuity, and on the 3rd day, her lines shattered. She refused retreat. She stood at the heart of her army, still commanding, still fighting, until there was nothing left but her and the corpses of her defenders. The king descended onto the battlefield, his golden armor unblemished, surrounded by guards who formed a wall of living steel. He dismissed them. He wanted no interference. She had defied him too long to be ended by another hand. He would kill her himself, and in doing so, show the galaxy that even the greatest of humans was nothing before him. She faced him alone, her body bruised, her weapon chipped, yet her stance unbroken. She had lost everything but her defiance, and that defiance cut deeper than any blade. Their duel was not equal. He was larger, stronger, armored with technology that outmatched her simple steel. She struck him again and again, each blow deflected or absorbed. Yet each strike carried fury, and each time she rose after being struck down, the watching soldiers, his and hers alike, felt something stir. It was not victory she sought. It was dignity. It was to show that even against overwhelming force, a human does not kneel. The king grew enraged. It was not her strength that angered him, but her refusal to break. Every strike he landed should have ended her, yet she rose again. He battered her down, dislocated her arm, shattered her ribs, and still she fought on. She spat blood in his face and laughed, a sound that rang across the battlefield, a sound more dangerous to him than any weapon. It said to all who heard it that his power was not absolute, that he could not command the human spirit. So he changed his method. He discarded his weapon and set upon her with his fists. He beat her not as a warrior, but as a tyrant enraged, pounding her body into the dirt. Blow after blow fell, each one meant to erase her not only in flesh, but in meaning. He would kill her slowly, publicly, stripping her of every shred of dignity, until all who watched would see only the futility of resistance. He broke her bones, caved in her chest, smashed her face, yet still she breathed. He had to hold her by the throat, lifting her into the air, her body broken, her blood spilling onto his gauntlet. With his other hand he struck again, the sound echoing like thunder across the silent field. Even then, she did not plead. She did not beg. Her last words came through broken teeth, whispered with the last of her breath. That he had not won, that he had not killed the future, that 5 shadows remained beyond his reach. The king did not understand her meaning, dismissing it as the delirium of a dying woman. He tightened his grip and with a final strike, ended her life. He dropped her corpse into the mud and raised his hands in triumph. His soldiers roared, though many with unease, for they had seen her defiance and could not forget it. The galaxy had witnessed the king beat a human general to death, but in doing so, he revealed his fear. No emperor descends to kill a gnat. No god dirties his hands on a mortal, unless that mortal carries a truth too dangerous to live. The king ordered her body displayed, crucified upon the ruins of her fortress. He commanded that her name be erased from all records, her followers hunted, her memory outlawed. He declared the age of resistance ended, boasting that he had crushed the last ember of rebellion. In his arrogance, he proclaimed to the galaxy that humanity was broken, that they were nothing but animals too weak to rise again. His words carried across every system. Yet behind his voice, the memory of her laughter remained. The galaxy believed the king's triumph had ended humanity's resistance. Yet across the dark corners of forgotten worlds, the children of the fallen general grew, scattered at birth to shield them from the king's wrath. Each child bore not only her blood, but her defiance. They were not soldiers when their journeys began. They were survivors, exiles, wanderers, shaped by circumstance into weapons sharper than steel. Where the king saw victory, the future whispered of revenge. The eldest lived in exile upon a barren moon, raised by those loyal to their mother's memory. From childhood, he studied war not as glory but as necessity. He pored over accounts of battles, dissecting each mistake, every maneuver, until his mind could weave patterns of what the galaxy had never seen. To him, battle was not chaos but music, each note a move, each silence a trap. He learned patience, for patience was a weapon of those without power. By the time he reached adulthood, he was more than a commander. He was a strategist who saw conflict like a grand board, where even defeat could be turned into bait. The king's fleets moved like hammer blows, but the eldest son would be the hand that redirected those blows against the king himself. Another child grew far from war, hidden among miners who toiled beneath the crust of a nameless rock. Their machines ruled life and death, and a broken drill could kill more swiftly than any blade. From youth, she learned to mend, to forge, to create from scrap and ruin. Her hands grew callous, her mind sharp with invention. She built tools out of nothing, weapons from discarded wreckage, and engines from fragments others had thrown away. While the king's empire relied upon factories and fleets, she learned the art of making power from scarcity. By the time she was grown, she was not simply an engineer but a force of ingenuity, a mind that could turn even a grain of sand into a weapon. Where others saw a limitation, she saw opportunity. The king had armies, but she would give her siblings the tools to destroy them piece by piece. The third child was not so fortunate. Their refuge had been a death world, a place of endless storms, poisonous flora, and predators that hunted by day and night. Alone, they learned not to fight nature, but to endure it. Every breath was a lesson in survival. They drank venom until it no longer killed them, ran from beasts until their legs carried them faster than exhaustion, starved until hunger itself became an ally. The world that should have killed them instead forged them into a creature that refused to die. Where others required comfort, they required only persistence. Where others broke under pressure, they thrived. This child would bring to the siblings a human truth most feared, that when all else fails, when body and mind are pushed beyond breaking, humanity endures still. The fourth grew not in isolation, but among the conquered. Hidden in plain sight, they lived under the boot of the king's empire, witnessing oppression daily. They saw how fear silenced voices, how cruelty divided people, how despair was used as a weapon sharper than any blade. Yet rather than despair, they learned the language of hearts. They listened, they spoke, they persuaded. They found ways to ignite courage in those who believed it lost forever. When soldiers raised weapons, this child raised hope, and hope proved heavier than any cannon. In every village, every gathering, every whispered corner, they spread the truth that tyranny was not eternal, that resistance was not futile. By the time they reached adulthood, they were not merely a diplomat, but a leader of peoples. They could turn strangers into allies, allies into armies, and armies into revolutions. The youngest bore the heaviest weight, for they remembered their mother not as a story, but as a wound. They had been there on the day of her fall. Too small to fight, but old enough to remember the sight of her blood. Rage became their tutor, and battle their language. Where their siblings plotted, built, endured, or inspired, the youngest sought only combat. They trained relentlessly, turning their fury into skill, their hatred into strength. Every strike of the blade, every broken bone, was dedicated to the king who had taken everything from them. They did not dream of strategy or alliances. They dreamed only of standing before him with bloodied hands, of tearing his throne to pieces. Where others sought justice, the youngest sought vengeance. And though vengeance alone can consume, when guided by the siblings, it became fire to forge an unstoppable warrior. For years they were apart, each believing themselves alone in their burden. Yet destiny has a way of reuniting that which was broken, one by one, through whispers, through contacts, through trails left by those who still remembered their mother. The siblings found each other again. Their reunion was not gentle. Each bore scars of a different life, and each believed their path to vengeance was the only true way. The strategist distrusted the warrior's rage, fearing it would undo them all. The engineer questioned the diplomat, believing words too weak against armies. The survivor mocked them all, insisting only endurance mattered. And the warrior, consumed with hatred, saw every hesitation as cowardice. But their mother's blood spoke louder than their divisions. In their quarrels, they remembered her laughter, her defiance, her death. They remembered that she had stood against the king not for herself but for them, for every human, for every enslaved world. Slowly, their arguments turned into planning. The strategist mapped the war. The engineer forged weapons unseen before. The survivor promised to outlast every storm the king would unleash. The diplomats spread their story into the ears of the oppressed, and the warrior vowed to be the blade that struck the final blow. The galaxy did not yet know their names, but whispers began to spread. The five had returned. The heirs of the fallen general lived. At first it was dismissed as legend, the same myth spoken of after their mother's death. But myths have power, and in dark places where hope was scarce, people clung to it. The siblings knew they could not fight openly yet. The king's empire was vast, and to strike blindly was to die. But they also knew the king had grown arrogant, careless, secure in his belief that humanity was extinguished. His pride was their weapon. His empire, bloated with conquest, was riddled with weaknesses waiting to be cut open. Their first meeting ended not in agreement but in a vow. They would avenge their mother, but they would not do so as five individuals. They would fight as one, each strength sharpened by the others. They would not strike as rebels or assassins. They would strike as humanity itself. For the king had believed he killed a single woman. In truth, he had awakened 5 children who carried within them the fury of a species the galaxy had underestimated for too long. They disperse again, not to remain apart, but to prepare. The strategists vanish into shadows, weaving alliances with hidden fleets, spreading false intelligence to confuse the Empire. The engineer burrowed into forgotten stations, building weapons that violated every galactic law war.